Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was somewhere between 9 and 11 years old when this happened. During the years, my family lived in a small 3-bedroom duplex. It wasn't a fancy place. It was the kind of home that felt tight even when everyone was quiet, where sounds traveled easily and privacy didn't really exist. Still, it was home, and for a while, it was all I knew. The layout of the house is important. My bedroom was at the end of a short, straight hallway. Directly across from my room was my mother's bedroom. The hallway was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other comfortably. At night, it always felt longer than it really was. My older brother's room was on the opposite side of the house, far enough away that you could hear him if he moved around, especially since the house wasn't well insulated. For the entire 3 to 4 years we lived there, I had one rule that I followed without ever really explaining it to anyone. I could not sleep facing the wall. Anytime I tried, something would happen. At first, it wasn't immediate. I would roll onto my side, facing the wall, pull the blanket up, and close my eyes like any normal kid trying to fall asleep. Everything would feel fine for a few minutes. Then, just as I started drifting off, I would feel it. A sharp smack to the back of my head. It felt exactly like being hit with an open hand. Not hard enough to seriously hurt, but hard enough to jolt me awake instantly. Hard enough that there was no mistaking it for a dream or a muscle twitch. The first few times it happened, I was convinced it was my older brother messing with me. He had always liked to push buttons and scare me when he could. It made sense. That's what older brothers do. I would jump up, heart racing, and look toward my door, expecting to see him laughing or running away. But no one was ever there. I brushed it off at first, even though it didn't fully make sense. Then it kept happening, again and again, always the same way. Always when I was facing the wall. Never when I slept on my back or facing the room. I started paying attention to details. My bedroom door was old and loud. The hinges squeaked badly. And the door made a very distinct sound when it opened or closed. There was no way someone could sneak in quietly. One night, after being smacked awake yet again, I realized my door had been completely shut the entire time. That was when doubt crept in. My brother wasn't exactly subtle. If he had opened the door, I would have heard it. If he had been in my room, I would have seen him. Still, I didn't want to accept any other explanation. I told myself maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I imagined it. Then my brother went to juvenile detention. He was gone for over 6 months. The house was quieter without him, calmer in some ways. I remember thinking, without really saying it out loud, that at least now the smacking would stop. It didn't. The very first week he was gone, I tried sleeping facing the wall again. Within minutes of drifting off, I was hit in the same exact way. Same spot. Same force. Same sudden wake-up. I sat straight up in bed, heart pounding, staring at my closed door, knowing there was absolutely no one else in the house who could have done it. My mother was not someone who moved quickly or quietly. Every step she took was heavy and obvious. If she walked down the hallway, you heard her coming. If she opened a door, you heard it. There was no chance she could have snuck into my room, hit me, and disappeared without a sound. It even happened once when I had a friend sleeping over. We were lying on separate sides of the bed, talking quietly before going to sleep. Eventually, we turned over to get comfortable. I faced the wall without thinking about it. Not long after, the familiar smack hit me in the back of the head. I jumped and yelped, fully awake. My friend sat up immediately and asked what happened. I told him someone hit me. He was confused. He hadn't seen or heard anything. He hadn't felt anything. Whatever was happening, it only ever happened to me. After that, I stopped trying to fight it. I trained myself to sleep facing the room or on my back. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than being woken up violently in the middle of the night. Then there was the night I saw him. My bedroom door was left open that night. I don't remember why. Maybe my mom forgot to close it. Maybe I didn't want it closed. Either way, the hallway light was off, leaving the corridor dark except for faint light spilling in from somewhere else in the house. I fell asleep on my back. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly. There was no sound that woke me. No noise, no movement. Just an overwhelming feeling that I was not alone. The kind of feeling that snaps you awake before your brain has time to understand why. I lay there, frozen, staring upward. I had the strong sense that someone was standing above me. Slowly, I shifted my gaze down the hallway. Because I was lying on my back, the hallway appeared upside down from my point of view. What I saw made no sense at first. There was a soft blue light suspended in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't bright. It didn't hurt my eyes. It wasn't flashing or pulsing. It was gentle, almost calm, floating about 6 to 12 inches above the floor. It didn't light up the walls or ceiling the way a normal light would. It just existed there, contained within itself. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but it felt like at least a full minute, maybe more. I wasn't scared. That's what stands out the most when I think back on it. I should have been terrified. I was a kid, alone at night, seeing something impossible in my hallway. But instead of fear, I felt strangely calm. After watching the light, I rolled over. Once I turned, I saw him. Standing there, or floating, was a slim, middle-aged man. He was covered in the same soft blue light I'd been watching. His feet were not touching the floor. He hovered in the hallway between my room and my mother's room, exactly in the center, as if he belonged there. He was looking directly at me. His face was completely expressionless. Not angry, not kind, just neutral. His eyes met mine, and we held eye contact without speaking. I had never seen him before in my life. He didn't look like anyone I knew. He didn't look threatening. He didn't look familiar. And for some reason, I wasn't afraid. We stared at each other for what felt like a very long time. There was no movement, no sound, no pressure, just stillness. I remember being aware of my breathing, slow and steady, as if my body didn't recognize danger. About 10 uninterrupted minutes passed. No blinking panic, no racing thoughts, just watching each other in silence. Somehow, while still looking at him, I fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, he was gone. I never saw him again. There were no more blue lights, no figures in the hallway, no repeat visits. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But one thing never changed. Until the day I moved out of that house, I could not sleep facing the wall. Any time I tried, even years later, the same thing would happen. A quick, sharp smack to the back of my head in the middle of the night, enough to wake me instantly. Enough to remind me that whatever it was, it hadn't left. I told people. I tried to explain it. No one believed me. They told me it was dreams, or imagination, or sleep paralysis, or stress. They told me I was remembering it wrong. But I knew the difference between a dream and being hit. I knew the difference between fear and imagination. I lived there for years. I learned the rules of that house. And one of those rules was simple. Do not sleep facing the wall. This happened when I was in my late 20s, during one of those in-between periods in life where nothing feels settled yet. I had just started a new job, the kind that feels like a reset, but my timing wasn't perfect. My apartment wasn't ready yet, and I had a few weeks to kill before I could move in. I didn't have many options, so my sister offered to let me crash on her couch. Her place wasn't small, but it wasn't big either. The couch was in the living room, right up near the front of the house. The front wall had windows facing the street, and at night you could hear cars pass, people walking by, the normal sounds of a quiet neighborhood winding down. It wasn't uncomfortable, just temporary. I kept telling myself it was only for a short while. The area was nice, quiet, suburban. The kind of place where people leave porch lights on and don't think twice about walking their dogs after dark. Nothing ever happened there. No break-ins, no random violence, nothing that made you feel unsafe. That sense of normalcy is important because without it, what happened later wouldn't have felt nearly as unsettling. One night, fairly late, my phone rang. It was my ex. We weren't together anymore, but we were still friends. There was no weird tension, no late-night booty call energy, nothing like that. We checked in on each other occasionally, and that was it. So when I picked up and immediately heard how shaken she sounded, it caught my attention. She was on the verge of tears. She told me she couldn't explain it, but she was convinced something bad was going to happen. Not anxiety in a vague sense, not stress. She sounded genuinely afraid, like she had a pit in her stomach that she couldn't shake. She asked if I could please come over. She didn't want to be alone. Normally, I might have tried to talk her down over the phone, but there was something about her voice that night that made me take it seriously. It wasn't dramatic or manipulative. It was raw. And it was the weekend, so I didn't have work the next morning. So I got in my car and drove over. When I got there, she was pacing. Couldn't sit still. She kept saying she didn't know why she felt this way, just that everything felt wrong. I stayed calm, talked to her, tried to ground her. We sat on the couch, talked through normal things, distractions, reassurances. Eventually, she started to relax. Her breathing slowed. The tension eased. Nothing happened. No strange noises, no phone calls, no emergencies, no sudden realization of what had scared her. We watched some TV, talked a bit more, and eventually went to sleep. It was completely uneventful. The next morning, we had breakfast like normal people who had just shared an unexpectedly emotional night. She felt embarrassed about how panicked she'd been. I told her it was fine, that sometimes your brain just does that, and that I was glad she'd called me instead of sitting alone with it. Then I left and drove back to my sister's place. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it felt. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, the kind where something feels paused. I walked up to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Right away, I saw a note. It was from my sister. It was short and urgent. She told me to contact the police. No explanation. No details. Just that. My stomach dropped. I called her immediately. She answered right away, and her voice was tight, controlled in that way people get when they're still processing something scary. She told me that after I'd left the night before, there had been an incident. Some teenagers had driven down the street, randomly, shooting a pistol at houses. I remember just standing there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to reconcile what she was saying with what I knew about that neighborhood. This wasn't a rough area. This wasn't somewhere you worried about drive-by shootings. This kind of thing didn't happen there, ever. But it had. They had fired multiple shots. 3 of them hit my sister's house. The police had come. Reports were filed. Neighbors were shaken. Everyone was trying to understand how something so senseless could happen in such a quiet place. I asked where the bullets hit. She paused before answering. Then she told me they went through the front of the house, straight into the living room. My chest felt tight as she kept talking. All 3 bullets had hit the couch. The couch where I had been sleeping. The couch where my head and torso would have been, right up against the front wall if I had been there that night. The couch I had slept on every night up until that one. I hung up the phone and just stood there. Eventually, I walked into the living room. You could see the damage clearly. The entry points, the torn fabric, the way the cushions had been ripped apart. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. It was physical proof that something had passed through that exact space with lethal force. If I hadn't gone to my ex's place, I would have been there, sleeping, unaware. There's no dramatic way to say that without it sounding exaggerated, but it's the truth. If I had stayed, those bullets would have hit me. Not grazed, not missed. They were right at couch height, right where a person would be lying down. I sat down on the floor and stared at it for a long time. I don't know how long. Minutes. Maybe longer. My brain kept trying to rewind the night, looking for the point where things could have gone differently. What if my ex hadn't called? What if I'd ignored the phone? What if I'd told her I was tired and stayed home? What if I'd left her place earlier? What if I'd come back 10 minutes sooner? Every version of that night where I didn't go over ends the same way. Me on that couch. And that realization is hard to sit with. What messes with me the most isn't just the randomness of the shooting, it's the timing. The fact that the one night I didn't sleep there was the one night it happened. The fact that my ex, of all people, called me in a panic with no clear reason, convinced something bad was coming. I don't think she had a premonition in a supernatural sense. I don't think she saw the future. I don't think the universe was sending messages or anything like that. I'm not wired that way. But I also can't ignore how it played out. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread for no reason she could articulate. She reached out. I responded. And because of that, I wasn't where I normally would have been when something violent and completely random occurred. That's not comforting. It's unsettling in a quiet way that doesn't fade. People like to say things happen for a reason, but moments like this make that idea feel hollow. There was no lesson, no moral, no growth that justified it. Just a narrow miss and the knowledge that chance plays a much bigger role in our lives than we like to admit. For a long time afterward, I felt disconnected from my routines. Sleeping felt different. Being home alone felt different. Even sitting on couches felt different for a while, which sounds ridiculous until you've had something like that happen. I also couldn't stop thinking about how easily it could have been nothing. If the bullets had missed the house entirely, it would have been a scary story for the neighborhood, and that would have been it. If they'd hit a different part of the house, I might never have connected it so personally. If I'd been there and survived somehow, it would have been a completely different kind of trauma. Instead, it landed in this strange middle space. No injury, no physical harm, just the knowledge of how close it was. That kind of near miss doesn't give you closure. It gives you questions. I don't think about it every day anymore, but it still comes back to me sometimes, usually late at night when things are quiet. I'll think about how casually that night started, how normal everything felt. How easily I could have brushed off that phone call. How quickly everything could have ended differently. It's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Not because something did happen, but because it almost did. And because the only reason it didn't was a phone call driven by a feeling that couldn't be explained. I don't know what to do with that, so like most things that don't fit neatly into logic, I just live with it. It sits there as a reminder that control is often an illusion, and that sometimes the smallest decisions, the ones that feel insignificant in the moment, are the ones that quietly save your life. I still think about that couch. I still think about that night. And I still feel a chill when I remember how close I came to never waking up on a random street in a nice neighborhood where nothing like that was supposed to happen. Years ago, I used to have episodes of sleep terrors. Not nightmares in the normal sense. Not bad dreams you wake up from sweating and then slowly calm down. These were different. Violent. Loud. My family told me later that sometimes I screamed so loudly in my sleep that I woke up the neighbors. Not once or twice, but enough that it became a pattern. At the time, I didn't remember most of it. I would wake up exhausted, confused, with my throat sore and my body aching, but with no clear memory of what I'd done or why. For a long time, it was something other people experienced around me, not something I consciously lived through. I only knew it was happening because of the reactions it caused. My parents looking shaken in the morning. My siblings telling me I'd scared them. Jokes made to lighten it, but always with an edge of discomfort. I tried not to think about it too much. It was easier to treat it like an embarrassing quirk than something dangerous. Then, one night, it stopped being abstract. I woke up to my boyfriend at the time screaming at me to wake up, not gently calling my name, not shaking my shoulder. He was yelling, panicked, his voice cracked with fear. I felt hands on me, rough and desperate, pulling me down hard. I hit the floor, disoriented, my heart racing, my mind scrambling to catch up with my body. The first thing I noticed was the cold air. The balcony doors were open. The second thing I noticed was where I was. I was halfway outside. One leg was already over the threshold. If he hadn't grabbed me when he did, I would have gone over. It took a few seconds for reality to settle in, for my brain to understand what my eyes were seeing and what my body had almost done. My boyfriend was shaking. He was breathing hard. His face was pale in a way I had never seen before. After a moment, once he realized I was awake and responsive, he just broke down and started crying. We sat on the floor for a long time before either of us could really talk. When he finally told me what it looked like from his side, it felt like listening to a story about someone else. Something out of a horror movie. Something exaggerated. Except it wasn't. He said he woke up suddenly, with that instinctive jolt you get when something is wrong, but you don't yet know what. The room was dark, quiet, and I was standing up next to the bed. I wasn't moving. I wasn't making any sound. I was just standing there, completely still, with a blank expression on my face. That alone scared him. He said there was something deeply wrong about it, something uncanny, like I wasn't really there, like I was awake but not awake. He said my eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Then I started panting, not softly, not like someone catching their breath, deep, fast animal breathing, like I'd been running or was about to run. He said he tried to say my name, but I didn't react at all. And then I screamed. He described it as a banshee scream, not a startled yell, not a cry. something raw and piercing, the kind of sound that doesn't sound human when it comes out. He said he had never heard anything like it before, and hopes he never will again. I bolted. I ran straight for the balcony door, still screaming, still not responding to him at all. I opened the doors with purpose, like I knew exactly where I was going. I didn't hesitate. I didn't slow down. I put one leg over the railing as if stepping over. It was the most natural thing in the world. That's when he grabbed me. He tackled me to the ground, wrapped his arms around me, dragged me backward, while I fought against him without knowing I was fighting. He said I was strong in a way I normally wasn't, that I didn't seem to recognize him, that I didn't seem afraid of the height or the fall or anything else. And then suddenly, I woke up. From my perspective, there was no build-up, no dream I could remember, no sense of danger before it happened. Just darkness, then chaos, then being on the floor with my boyfriend crying over me. That disconnect is one of the hardest parts to live with. Knowing that my body can do things my mind isn't aware of. Knowing that I can move, act, scream, and almost die without any conscious intention. It breaks a basic sense of trust you're supposed to have in yourself. You assume that if something is happening, you'll know it. That if you're in danger, you'll feel fear. That if you're about to step off a balcony, some alarm will go off in your head. That night proved that assumption wrong. After we both calmed down, neither of us slept. We sat there until morning. The balcony doors shut and locked, the lights on. He kept looking at me like he was trying to reconcile the person he loved with the thing he had seen. I kept replaying his description over and over, trying to imagine myself like that and failing. It took me years to recover from that experience, not just emotionally, but practically. For a long time after, I was terrified of sleeping near windows, terrified of balconies, terrified of stairs, terrified of being alone at night. I moved furniture away from doors. I locked things obsessively. I avoided apartments above the ground floor whenever I could. The idea of living on my own felt impossible, because what happens if there's no one there to stop me? That thought became a constant background noise in my life. Even when the sleep terrors became less frequent, even when they seemed to fade away, the fear didn't. It lingered. The fear wasn't of the episodes themselves, but of the one time they might come back when no one is there to intervene. I've tried to explain this to people, and it's hard to make them understand. They hear sleep terror and think of someone yelling in their sleep or thrashing around. They don't think of someone calmly standing up, opening doors, and walking toward death with no hesitation. There's something especially disturbing about the silence before the scream, about the blank expression, about the idea that I wasn't panicked until after I woke up, that whatever part of my brain was in control at that moment didn't feel fear the way I do when I'm awake. It makes you question where fear actually lives. What part of you decides to protect you? And what happens when that part goes offline? My boyfriend at the time was never quite the same after that. He tried to be supportive, but I could tell it haunted him. He had nightmares about it. He would wake up suddenly and check if I was still in bed. He flinched the next few times I moved suddenly at night. Eventually, the relationship ended for unrelated reasons, but I know that night changed the way he saw me and the way he slept. It changed me, too. For years, I avoided living alone. I stayed with roommates longer than I wanted to. I chose places based on layout rather than comfort. I turned down opportunities because the housing situation felt unsafe. I hated admitting that fear controlled that much of my life, but it did. Even now, the thought still creeps in sometimes. What if one day I wake up on my way to the ground? That sentence lives in my head, not dramatically, quietly, like a possibility that never fully goes away. I don't obsess over it every night, but it's there, especially during stressful periods or when my sleep is disrupted. I've done everything you're supposed to do. I've talked to doctors. I've adjusted sleep habits. I've learned grounding techniques. I've reduced triggers where possible. And for the most part, it's worked. I haven't had an episode like that in a very long time. But trust, once broken, doesn't fully come back. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from knowing you can't rely on your own awareness. It's not fear of an external threat. It's fear of yourself, of your own unconscious actions, of the idea that danger doesn't always come from outside your body, but sometimes from within it. People like to say, "You're fine now," and I know they mean well. And logically, I know I'm safer now than I was then. But fear isn't always logical. It's shaped by experience, by memory, by moments that imprint themselves too deeply to erase. That night imprinted itself permanently. I still remember the cold air from the open balcony, the way my heart felt when I realized how close I had come, the sound of my boyfriend crying, not out of sadness, but out of sheer terror and relief colliding at once. I don't know what exactly my brain was doing in that moment. I don't know why my body chose that path. I don't know why the scream came when it did, or why I moved with such certainty towards something that would have killed me. What I do know is that living with that knowledge changes how you see independence, safety, and sleep itself. It took me years to build up the courage to live on my own, and even now that courage feels conditional, built on routines, on locks, on habits, on hope that whatever part of my brain once went rogue doesn't decide to do it again. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because it's part of who I am now, part of how I understand myself and my limits. It's a reminder that the line between safety and danger can sometimes run straight through your own mind. And that's a much harder thing to make peace with than any external threat. I live my life anyway. I sleep anyway. I move forward anyway. But there's a quiet vigilance that never fully shuts off. A part of me that listens for silence, for panning, for that moment before a scream. Because once you've learned that you can walk toward the edge without knowing it, you never quite forget how close you came to falling. When I was around 9 years old, my neighbor and his wife had a barbecue and invited family and friends over. This wasn't unusual at all. Our families were very close, the kind of close where doors were rarely locked and kids moved freely between houses. We trusted each other completely. Even now, years later, we're still close with them. My neighbor's wife was my best friend's aunt. I'll call my friend Dee. Because of that connection, his family came too. To me, they weren't just guests. They were basically an extension of my own family. I spent a lot of time at their house growing up, and they spent a lot of time at ours. There was nothing strange or uncomfortable about any of it. I don't remember every detail of that night, but I remember enough. I was probably in the pool with Dee at some point, splashing around, being loud, doing what kids do when there's food, adults talking, and no real rules for a few hours. I remember eating, running around, and just enjoying the noise and activity of having a lot of people around. It felt safe, familiar, normal. At some point, I decided I was tired. I don't remember making a big deal out of it or telling anyone. I just went inside and went to my room. I turned the lights on and climbed up into my bed. At the time, I slept in a loft bed. The kind that's raised up with a ladder you have to climb to get in and out. From up there, you could see most of the room, and it felt like a little hideaway. I lay there for a while with the lights still on. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't even trying to sleep. I was just laying there, staring around, listening faintly to the sounds of the party outside. Voices, laughter, the muffled noise of adults talking. It all felt distant but comforting. After a bit, Dee's mom came into my room. That part is very clear in my memory. She opened the door, stepped inside, and looked at me. This didn't feel strange at all. Like I said, his parents were basically my second family. They came into my room all the time. They checked on me, talked to me, joked with me. There was nothing alarming about her being there. She asked me why I was laying down while the party was still going on. Her tone wasn't angry or sharp. It was casual, almost playful, like she was teasing me for missing out on the fun. After she said that, she turned and walked back out of the room. That was it. No lingering. No weird behavior. No sense of urgency. Just a simple question. And then she left. I remember laying there for a moment after she left, thinking about what she said. I decided she was right. The party was still going, and I didn't want to miss it. I felt a little silly for hiding in my room while everyone else was outside. So I slid out of my bed, climbed down the ladder, and headed toward the back door to go outside. The layout of the house matters here. The back door was right next to the door to my parents' bedroom. Their bedroom door was almost always open, especially when people were over. That night was no different. I walked down the hall, feeling completely normal. Not scared, not confused. Just a kid going back to a party. When I got to the back door, I reached for the knob and tried to turn it. It wouldn't open. I tried again, jiggling the handle a bit, thinking maybe I hadn't turned it right. Still locked. That surprised me. The back door was rarely locked when people were over, especially during a party. I tried one more time, more forcefully. That's when my mom sat up in bed. She looked over at me and asked where I was trying to go. I told her, very casually, that Dee's mom had come to get me and told me to come back to the party. I expected her to just say, okay, or tell me to unlock the door. Instead, she paused. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me that Dee and his family had left hours ago. I remember the confusion hitting me first. Not fear, just confusion. I remember thinking she must be mistaken, that maybe she meant someone else, that maybe she didn't realize they had come back. I said something like, no, she just came into my room. My mom sat up more fully and looked at the clock. It was midnight. Everyone had gone home hours earlier. The party was long over. The yard was empty. The pool lights were off. The house was quiet. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what she was telling me. My mom could tell immediately that something was wrong. She asked me to explain exactly what I meant. I told her again that Dee's mom had come into my room, asked why I was laying down while the party was still going on, and told me to come back outside. My mom got out of bed. She walked through the house, checking rooms, checking doors, looking outside. There was no one there, no cars, no voices, no movement, just darkness and silence. That's when fear finally crept in. Up until that moment, everything had felt normal, familiar, safe. But now there was a gap in reality that didn't make sense. And my 9-year-old brain didn't know how to fill it. I hadn't been asleep. There was no moment where I remembered drifting off. No dreamlike transition. No sense of waking up. I had been laying there with the lights on. I remembered the sound of her voice clearly. I remembered seeing her face, her clothes, the way she spoke. It didn't feel like imagination. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something that had actually happened. That night, my mom stayed up with me for a while. She reassured me. She told me it was probably a dream or that I had dozed off without realizing it. She said sometimes kids' brains can do strange things when they're tired. I nodded and tried to accept that explanation. But something about it didn't sit right. Even as a kid, I knew what dreaming felt like. I knew the fuzzy, disconnected feeling of waking up from a dream. This wasn't that. There was no blur, no confusion before or after. Just a straight line from laying in bed to seeing her, to getting up and walking toward the door. I slept in my parents' room that night. For a long time after that, I didn't want to be alone in my room at night. I didn't talk about it much because I didn't want to sound silly or scared, but the memory stuck with me. As I got older, the part that bothered me most wasn't just that I might have hallucinated or dreamed something. It was the timing. The fact that whoever or whatever I thought I saw appeared right when I was alone, right when the house was quiet, and right when I was vulnerable. And there's another part that still unsettles me deeply. If the back door hadn't been locked, I would have gone outside. I would have walked into a dark backyard alone, toward a pool, at midnight, thinking I was rejoining a party that didn't exist. I don't know what would have happened then. Maybe nothing. Maybe I would have stepped outside, realized no one was there, and gone back in confused. That's the rational explanation. That's the one I try to stick with. But there's a darker possibility that creeps in sometimes. What if something wanted me outside? What if whatever my brain created, or whatever I thought I saw, was enough to get me to move without questioning it? Enough to override my normal instincts? At 9 years old, I trusted adults completely. Especially adults I knew well. If Dee's mom told me to come outside, I wouldn't have questioned it for a second. I didn't question it when it happened. That's the part that scares me now. Not just the image of her standing in my room, but how easily I listened. How naturally I followed. As an adult, I've gone back and forth on explanations, sleep hallucinations, hypnagogic experiences, a microdream while awake, stress, fatigue, childhood imagination. All of those are possible, but none of them fully explain how real it felt. They also don't explain why it took the form of a person I trusted, using a reason that made perfect sense at a moment when I was isolated. I've talked to other people about it over the years, and most of them shrug it off. Kids imagine things. Brains do weird stuff. End of story. And maybe that's all it was. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that locked door, about how close I came to stepping outside, about how I didn't hesitate at all. I think about how many stories you hear as an adult about kids wandering off, about accidents, about things that happen in moments when no one is watching. And I wonder how many of those moments start with something small and unexplainable that no one ever talks about. What really stays with me is that there was no fear until after. No warning bells, no sense of danger, just a calm, familiar interaction that led me straight toward a situation that could have gone very wrong. Even now, decades later, I can still picture her standing in my doorway. I can still hear her voice. I can still remember the feeling of climbing down the ladder, completely confident that I was doing the right thing. That memory hasn't faded the way most childhood memories do. It hasn't softened or blurred. It's sharp, like it's been preserved exactly as it happened. I don't know if I hallucinated. I don't know if I dreamed. I don't know if my brain filled in a gap without my awareness. All I know is that something convinced a 9-year-old me to leave the safety of my room in the middle of the night, and the only thing that stopped me was a locked door and a parent who happened to be awake. That thought still sends a chill through me. Whatever the explanation is, I'm grateful for that locked door. And I'm grateful my mom was there to question me instead of sleeping through it. Because sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't what you saw. It's what almost happened and how easily you could have let it. I've had several creepy moments in my life, the kind that stick with you in different ways, but this one comes back to my mind more often than I expect. It isn't as extreme or violent as some of the stories people tell, but there's something about it that gets under my skin in a quiet, lingering way. It didn't happen to me directly, and maybe that's part of why it's so unsettling. It's the kind of story that makes you realize how thin the line is between safety and danger, and how easily you can be completely unaware that something is wrong. This happened when I was younger. My sister was dating a guy at the time, and we all knew his family fairly well. They were normal people, nothing unusual about them. A typical family in a typical house, the kind of place you'd never expect something bad to happen. They lived in a decent neighborhood, not flashy, not rough, just quiet and ordinary. The kind of place where routines felt safe and predictable. One day, their house was robbed. On its own, that's already upsetting. Having your home violated like that, knowing strangers went through your personal space, touched your things, took what they wanted, and left chaos behind. Even if no one is hurt, it leaves a mark. You don't feel the same way in your own house afterward. But what made this situation so much worse was the fact that someone was home when it happened. My sister's boyfriend had a younger brother. He was still living at home, and his bedroom was in the attic. At some point before this happened, the family had converted the attic into a proper bedroom for him. It wasn't just a storage space anymore. It had walls, a bed, a desk, and his computer. It was his little world, tucked away above the rest of the house. On the day of the robbery, he was home alone. He was up in his attic bedroom, sitting at his computer, wearing headphones. He was doing what so many of us have done 1,000 times. Playing games, watching videos, listening to music. Completely absorbed. Completely disconnected from what was happening around him. While he sat there, people were inside his house. Strangers. They were robbing the place. They went through the rooms downstairs. They opened drawers. They took things. They made a mess. They turned the house upside down. And all the while, the youngest son was just a few rooms away, above them, unaware that anything was wrong. He didn't hear a thing. The headphones blocked out the sounds. The attic was already separated from the rest of the house. He had no reason to think anything was happening. As far as he knew, he was just home alone, enjoying his time, waiting for his parents to come back. Eventually, the robbers left. Still, he had no idea. It wasn't until his parents came home that the truth came out. They walked into their house and immediately knew something was wrong. Things were out of place. Drawers were open. Items were missing. The house was trashed. That moment alone must have been terrifying. That instant realization that someone had been in your home without permission, that your safe place had been violated. But then something even worse would have hit them. Their youngest son was supposed to be home. I can't imagine what went through their minds in those seconds. Walking into a robbed house and knowing your child should be there. Wondering if he had seen something. Wondering if he had been hurt. wondering if he was hiding somewhere, scared, wondering if the worst had already happened. They started screaming his name, calling out for him, probably with panic in their voices, running through the house, checking rooms, checking corners, their minds racing through every horrible possibility. That kind of fear is primal. It bypasses logic. It goes straight to your chest and squeezes until you can't breathe. And then, finally, they found him, up in the attic, alive, safe, sitting at his computer, completely confused about why his parents were yelling his name like that. He had no idea what had happened. No idea how close he had been to something potentially very dangerous. The relief they must have felt is almost impossible to put into words. That moment when fear collapses into relief so intense, it probably makes your knees weak. When you realize your child is okay. When the worst thing you imagined didn't happen. When you can finally breathe again. But relief doesn't erase what could have happened. That's the part that stuck with me. The idea that he was there the entire time. That strangers were moving through his house while he sat upstairs unaware. That if something had gone slightly differently, if one of them had gone into the attic, if they had made more noise, if he had come downstairs at the wrong moment, the outcome could have been very different. It's terrifying because it's so ordinary. There was nothing dramatic about it. No warning signs, no alarms, no confrontation. Just a normal day, a kid on his computer, and criminals quietly doing what they came to do. After I heard that story, something shifted in me. I started thinking about how often we assume we'd know if something was wrong. How we imagine danger as loud, obvious, impossible to miss. We picture breaking glass, shouting, footsteps, alarms. But sometimes danger is quiet. Sometimes it slips in while you're distracted. Sometimes it exists just a few feet away, and you have no idea. Since then, I've always had a hard time being home alone. Even now, decades later, as a grown adult, that feeling hasn't fully gone away. I can be rational about it during the day. I can tell myself that I'm safe, that the doors are locked, that nothing is happening. But at night, when the house is quiet and my mind starts to wander, that story creeps back in. Sometimes I'll be lying in bed, unable to sleep, listening to the normal sounds of a house settling. A creak here, a pop there, the hum of appliances, and my brain will start filling in the gaps. I'll think about how easy it would be for someone to be inside without me knowing. How sound can be masked. How attention can be absorbed by a screen, a book, a phone. I'll think about that kid in the attic, completely unaware. And I'll get the heebie-jeebies. It's not full-blown panic. It's more like a low-level unease, a sense that I'm too exposed, that I'm too alone, that if something were to happen, I might not notice until it was too late. Sometimes I wish I had a dog. Not even for protection, really. Just for the reassurance. The idea that there's another living being in the house who would notice if something was off. Someone who would hear things I might miss. Someone who would react before I had to. There's something comforting about that. About not being the only set of ears. The only awareness in the house. I know, logically, that what happened to my sister's boyfriend's family was rare. I know most people are never robbed, and even fewer are robbed while someone is home and unaware. I know that fear doesn't always match reality. But fear doesn't care about statistics. Fear cares about stories. And that story lodged itself deep in my brain. It's the randomness of it that gets me. The fact that the brother didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't careless. He wasn't reckless. He was just doing what kids and teens do. Being on his computer, wearing headphones, existing in his own little bubble. And the parents didn't do anything wrong either. They didn't leave him in a dangerous place. They didn't ignore warning signs. They just went out, trusting that their home was safe. That trust was broken. Even though in the end no one was physically harmed, the psychological impact lingered. I know it did for them, and it did for me even as someone on the outside. It made me realize how much we rely on assumptions. That being home equals being safe. That being alone but indoors is protection enough. That danger announces itself. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it moves quietly through familiar spaces while you're distracted. And the only reason nothing worse happens is pure chance. That thought has stayed with me for 30 years. It pops up when I'm alone at night. When I hear a noise I can't immediately explain. When I'm wearing headphones and suddenly feel the urge to take them off and listen. When I double-check locks even though I know I already locked them. It's not paralyzing. I still live my life. I still enjoy my own space. But there's a background awareness that wasn't there before. A sense that safety isn't guaranteed just because things feel normal. And maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe it's just part of growing up, of realizing the world isn't as simple or as safe as it felt when you were a kid. Of understanding that bad things don't always come with warning signs or dramatic moments. Still, when the house is quiet and sleep won't come, I sometimes think about that attic bedroom. About a kid sitting at his computer while strangers move through his home. About parents walking into chaos and fearing the worst. About the relief that followed and the shadow that never fully went away. And in those moments, I really wish I had a dog curled up at the foot of my bed. Not because I expect something bad to happen, but because once you've heard a story like that, once you've truly let it sink in, being alone never feels quite the same again. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. I knew him through Facebook for a few years. Not one of those distant, barely there connections you forget about, but someone I actually interacted with. He was funny, thoughtful, kind in a very genuine way. The kind of person who checked in on people, who commented encouragement instead of snark, who felt real even through a screen. If you'd asked me to describe him, awesome guy would have been the simplest and most accurate answer. One morning, he posted about a nightmare he'd had the night before. At the time, it didn't feel especially strange. People post about bad dreams all the time. Stress dreams, anxiety dreams, weird symbolic stuff that doesn't mean anything once you're fully awake. I remember reading it while scrolling, half awake myself, coffee not even finished yet. But the way he wrote it made me stop. It wasn't vague. It wasn't surreal in that dreamlike way where things blur together. It was detailed, structured, sequential, like a memory instead of a dream. He wrote about hanging out with a few people, casual, comfortable, a couple of drinks, conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. That feeling of being relaxed, social, safe, then a slight shake in the ground. Not enough to panic over, just enough to notice. And then, a second later, the lights went out. No power. They wandered outside, trying to make sense of it. The whole neighborhood was dark. That detail stuck with me even then. Not just his house, not just one block, but everything. The kind of blackout that makes you realize how much you rely on electricity to tell you the world is still normal. They had a few more drinks, waiting for the power to come back. That felt very human. That instinct to normalize something unsettling instead of immediately reacting to it. To stay put. To wait. Then he noticed a strange orange glow on the horizon. He wrote that it was the wrong direction for sunset or sunrise. That detail mattered. It told you his brain was trying to place it, to rationalize it, to fit it into something familiar. But it didn't fit, and it felt warm. Sirens started in the distance. Cell service went out. No one knew what was happening, but the glow and the heat kept increasing. Slowly at first, then steadily. They were standing in the street when they saw the first people running toward them. Burned, bloodied, panicked, not talking, just screaming. That's where the dream shifted from unsettling to terrifying. He described the confusion, the inability to process what they were seeing. A huge wall of flame rolling toward them, swallowing the runners one by one. People disappearing into fire, the screaming snapping them out of that frozen state. Suddenly, he was alone. Everyone else scattered at once like a school of fish reacting to a predator. That image stuck with me too. How instinctive it was. How sudden. How lonely it left him. He knew he was doomed. That was the line that made my stomach drop even when I first read it. Not, I was scared. Not, I tried to run. But I know I am doomed. That certainty. That resignation. He tried to escape, but it was pointless. People fled past him. He searched for shelter. The heat built like a blowtorch, trying to set him on fire. He wondered how much dying hurts, and he wondered if it would be over soon. Then the flames hit him. He wrote about the pain being intense, about being on fire, about being frightened, and then waking up. He ended it by trying to lighten the mood, saying the dreams tormented him, that his back pain was probably working its way into his sleep and building stories around it. He joked that he needed coffee and counseling. At the time, that last line made it feel safe, like he was grounded, like he understood it was just a dream, like there was nothing to worry about. People commented with the usual responses. That's terrifying. Stress dreams are the worst. Hope you're okay. A few laughing reactions at the counseling joke. Nothing ominous. Nothing that suggested what was coming. The next night, his room caught on fire. He didn't make it out. When I found out, it didn't register at first. It was one of those moments where your brain refuses to connect the words. Fire. Death. His name. They didn't belong together. It felt like a mistake, like misinformation, like something I was misunderstanding. Then the details came out. It was real. It had happened. He was gone. And suddenly, that post wasn't just a nightmare someone shared online. It was a document, a time-stamped piece of writing sitting there, unchanged, describing something horrifyingly close to how he died. I went back and reread it. Every line felt heavier. The orange glow, the heat, the power going out, the sense of inevitability, the being alone, the feeling of fire, the fear, the wondering how much dying hurts. I know logically that dreams don't predict the future. I know that fires happen. I know that coincidence exists. I know that the brain is very good at finding patterns after the fact, especially when grief is involved. But knowing all of that doesn't stop the chill, because this wasn't a vague dream about danger or death. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't abstract. It was specific. Fire, heat, being engulfed, being on fire, dying in flames. And it happened the very next night. What makes it worse is how grounded his explanation was. He blamed back pain, stress, physical discomfort, bleeding into his sleep. He didn't treat it like a premonition. He didn't act afraid. He didn't warn anyone. He went to sleep like normal. There's something deeply unsettling about that. The idea that someone could articulate their own death so closely, dismiss it as just a bad dream, and then be gone within hours. I think about that a lot. About how we all try to explain things away. How we reach for logic because it's safer than sitting with uncertainty. How many moments we brush off because they don't fit into how we think the world works. I also think about how helpless it makes you feel in hindsight. There's nothing anyone could have done. No warning sign that would have made sense at the time. No reason to tell him to change his routine, or stay awake, or sleep somewhere else. If someone had commented, "Hey, that's creepy. Don't go to sleep tonight," it would have sounded ridiculous. And yet, now, 7 years later, it still creeps me out. Not in a jump scare way, in a slow, lingering way. The kind that settles in your chest and stays there. The kind that makes you reread old messages from people who are gone and wonder how many things you missed because you didn't know to look for them. I don't believe he foresaw his death. I don't believe in prophetic dreams in a literal sense. But I do believe the human brain is capable of producing things that feel far too precise to be comfortable. Maybe his body knew something was wrong before his conscious mind did. Maybe there was a physical issue, faulty wiring, something already dangerous in that room, and his brain built a story around the sensation of heat or pain it anticipated. Maybe it was pure coincidence layered with tragedy. But even if there's a rational explanation, it doesn't erase the emotional impact. Because when someone you know dies, especially suddenly and violently, your brain goes looking for meaning whether you want it to or not. It scans the past for clues, for signs, for anything that might make the loss feel less random. That post feels like a message left behind, even though it wasn't meant to be. It's still there, frozen in time. A nightmare written in his own words, shared casually with friends, never knowing how closely it would mirror reality. Every once in a while, it pops up in my memories where I think about him and end up scrolling back to it. And every time, I feel the same tightness in my throat, the same disbelief, the same quiet horror. He was an awesome guy. He deserved to wake up the next morning and laugh about a bad dream. He deserved to complain about back pain and get coffee and counseling and move on with his life. He didn't deserve to have his worst nightmare become his last experience. I don't know what to do with that knowledge, so I just carry it. 7 years later, it still hasn't faded. It still makes me pause when someone talks about vivid dreams. It still makes me uneasy when I think about how thin the line can be between imagination and reality, between one night and the next. Some stories don't scare you because they suggest something supernatural. They scare you because they remind you how fragile everything is, and how sometimes the most terrifying things don't announce themselves as warnings. They just show up as a post on your feed, written by someone you like, and only become horrifying after it's far too late. I went on 3 dates with a man who, at first, seemed like a genuinely lovely gentleman. He was polite, soft-spoken, attentive in a way that didn't feel forced. He listened when I talked. He remembered small details. He never raised his voice, never pushed boundaries, never gave me that uneasy feeling people warn you to trust. If anything, he seemed careful, almost restrained, like someone who had learned how to behave properly and wanted to do things the right way. Early on, he told me his first name and mentioned that he used his mother's surname. He said it casually, like it was just a personal choice or a family thing. I didn't question it. People change names for all sorts of reasons. Divorce, estrangement, preference. It didn't stand out to me as a red flag. If anything, I thought it was a little unusual, but not suspicious. On our third date, I met his dad. His father was older, quiet, and carried himself differently. There was something heavier about him, something worn. During conversation, I learned his surname. It was a normal moment, nothing dramatic. We talked, we ate, we parted ways. I went home thinking the evening had gone fine. Later that night, out of simple curiosity, I Googled my date's first name together with his father's surname. I wasn't digging. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't trying to uncover anything dark. It was the kind of idle curiosity people have all the time. The kind that usually leads to a LinkedIn profile, or an old sports result, or nothing at all. Instead, my stomach dropped. His face appeared on the first page of the news. Not a similar name, not a distant match. His face, his eyes. The same man I had been sitting across from days earlier, smiling at me, asking me questions about my life. The headline said he had been convicted of manslaughter. I clicked. I read. And the more I read, the worse it became. The victim had died miserably at his hands. The details were horrifying, the kind you wish you could unread once they're in your head. This wasn't a youthful mistake or a technicality. This was real violence, real suffering. A life ended brutally. In that moment, everything snapped into place. The different surname, the careful presentation, the way he had curated his identity. He hadn't just chosen his mother's surname casually. He had done it to hide, to distance himself from a past he knew would make people run. I didn't hesitate. I blocked him immediately. Phone, messages, social media, everything. I didn't explain. I didn't confront him. I didn't give him the chance to speak. Something deep in me knew that engaging further was dangerous. That instinct, the one people talk about but often ignore, was screaming. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Like I had dodged something terrible. Like I had caught it just in time. That relief didn't last. 4 days later, my landlord and I were pulling the car out of the garage. It was daytime. Ordinary. Mundane. I was half distracted, thinking about errands, about work, about nothing important at all. Then I saw him. He was sitting in his car, parked outside my house, watching us. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. My body went cold in a way I still remember vividly. This wasn't a coincidence. I had never told him where I lived, not casually, not indirectly. He should not have been there, but he was. He didn't wave, he didn't smile. He just sat there, staring, like he had been waiting, like he had been watching for a while. I don't remember much of what I said to my landlord in that moment. I remember the sound of my own voice shaking. I remember pointing. I remember the way my landlord immediately understood that something was wrong without me having to explain much. We left. The rest of the day passed in a fog of fear and disbelief. I kept checking windows, jumping at sounds, telling myself it was over, that he had just shown up once and would go away now that he knew I wasn't interested. That night, at around 7 p.m., someone started banging on my door. Not knocking, banging, hard enough to rattle the frame. I froze. My whole body locked up. Then I heard his voice. He was shouting my name, shouting for me to get out there, demanding to see me, swearing. The sound of his voice was nothing like the gentle tone he had used on our dates. This was raw, angry, entitled, like he believed I owed him something, like he was furious that I had taken something from him by cutting him off. I started crying immediately. I couldn't stop. Fear took over completely. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. I just stood there listening to him rage on the other side of it. knowing that a thin piece of wood was the only thing separating me from a man who had already killed someone. My landlord called the police. When they arrived, the relief was overwhelming, but it didn't erase the terror. I remember standing there, trying to explain everything while my voice broke, while my brain struggled to stay focused. The police took it very seriously, too seriously for comfort. They warned me about him. They told me I needed to get a lifetime protection order. They didn't say it lightly. They didn't hesitate. They spoke like people who had seen this pattern before and knew exactly where it could lead. Later, I learned the full truth. This wasn't an isolated incident in his past. He had a long history of abusing women. Multiple restraining orders had been filed against him over the years. Multiple women had tried to protect themselves from him. Multiple warnings had existed, all hidden behind a carefully constructed version of himself that he showed to new people. I wasn't special. I wasn't targeted randomly. I was just the next person who didn't know yet. That realization hit hard. I think about how close I came to staying longer, to trusting him more, to letting him into my life in a deeper way. I think about how easily things could have gone differently if I hadn't Googled his name, if I hadn't trusted that small moment of curiosity, if I had brushed off that instinct and given him another chance. I think about how calmly he had looked at me across the table, how safe he had seemed, how normal. I am still in disbelief sometimes. Even now, it doesn't fully feel real. It feels like something that happens to other people, like a story you read and shake your head at, grateful it wasn't you. But it was me, and I was lucky. Lucky that I found out when I did. Lucky that I blocked him. Lucky that my landlord was there. Lucky that the police took it seriously. Lucky that I escaped before becoming another name attached to his history. What stays with me the most is how easily he blended in, how convincing he was, how nothing about him, on the surface, warned me of what he was capable of. It changed the way I see dating, trust, and first impressions forever. Sometimes I still think about the moment I saw him sitting outside my house. The certainty in my chest that something was very, very wrong. The knowledge that the danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was right there, watching. I don't know what scares me more, the violence in his past or the fact that he was able to hide it so well. All I know is that I escaped a monster, and I don't take that for granted for a single second. I'm a 911 operator, and after doing this job for a while, you develop a certain rhythm to the calls. You learn patterns. You learn which situations usually turn out to be nothing, which ones escalate, and which ones make the hair on the back of your neck stand up the second you hear the caller's voice. This one started quietly. A call came in from a woman who was barely speaking above a whisper. Her voice was shaky, controlled in that way people get when they're trying not to panic because they're afraid the panic itself will make things worse. She said, "I think there's somebody in my house." That sentence is one we hear more often than you'd think. And most of the time, nothing comes of it. A noise turns out to be the house settling. A shadow turns out to be a coat. A door someone forgot they left unlocked. A pet moving around. Those calls usually end with relief, apologies, and embarrassment on the caller's end. And I want to say this clearly, because it matters. We never mind those calls. I always tell people, if you're worried about calling because you think we'll judge you, don't. We absolutely welcome the lighthearted outcomes. We would much rather send officers to a house where nothing is wrong than talk to someone after something terrible has already happened. Embarrassment fades. Regret doesn't. So when she said it, my first instinct wasn't fear. It was focus. I asked her where she was in the house. She told me she was locked in the bathroom. Door locked. Lights off. She was whispering because she was afraid someone would hear her. That detail mattered. People who are imagining things don't usually take that kind of precaution. They might sound nervous, but they're not hiding. They're not whispering. They're not barricaded. I started entering the call notes immediately. Address, situation, possible intruder. I dispatched units while keeping her on the line. I spoke softly, calmly, the way we're trained to do. I asked her not to leave the bathroom, not to make noise, to stay exactly where she was. She told me she had heard something earlier, a sound that didn't belong. She couldn't explain it well, just that something felt wrong. A shift, a presence. The kind of thing that makes your body react before your brain catches up. While we waited for officers to arrive, I kept her talking just enough to keep her grounded, but not so much that she'd risk being heard. I could hear her breathing, fast, shallow, controlled. She was trying very hard not to cry. When the first units arrived, I stayed on the line. I could hear the officers through the radio and her phone at the same time. They announced themselves. They made entry. They moved through the house carefully. A few minutes later, they escorted her out. She was safe. That's usually where these calls end. She went outside, wrapped in a blanket, shaking but alive. The officers told her they didn't see anything obvious. No broken doors, no smashed windows, no clear signs of forced entry. The house looked normal. Still, something didn't sit right. A few minutes after she was out, one of the officers radioed in and asked me to send a couple more units. That caught my attention immediately. Officers don't usually ask for backup after declaring a house clear unless something has changed. Unless something doesn't add up. Unless their instincts are telling them the story isn't finished. I sent the additional units without hesitation. A short time later, one of the officers keyed up again. His tone was different now. Not panicked, not shouting, but cautious, tight. He said, radio? Yeah, someone sure snuck in here. Thing is, there's no sign that he ever snuck back out. That sentence made my stomach drop, because suddenly, all the possibilities rearranged themselves into something much worse. No sign of entry means he might have been there before she got home. No sign of exit means he was still inside. The officers began searching again, slower this time, more deliberate. Every closet, every room, every space that could possibly hide a person. They brought in K9. I stayed at my console, listening, typing, tracking units. But my mind was locked onto one image, a man hiding in a house while a woman is inside it. Not breaking in and running, not grabbing something and leaving, just hiding, waiting. That's a different kind of threat. The dog found him. He was hiding behind a cabinet door. Not inside a closet, not under a bed. Behind a cabinet door. A place you wouldn't think to check unless you were specifically looking for someone who knew how to disappear into a space. Someone who had time. Someone who was patient. When they pulled him out, he didn't bolt. He didn't fight. He didn't act surprised. He had been there long enough to stay quiet while she moved through the house. Long enough to listen to her lock herself in the bathroom. Long enough to hear officers arrive and still not reveal himself. I don't know what his exact plan was. And honestly, I don't want to. Because whatever it was, it involved being inside her home. Without her knowledge, it involved hiding. It involved waiting. And that alone is enough to make my skin crawl. After the call was cleared and everything was documented, I sat there for a moment longer than usual. That's another thing people don't realize about this job. You don't always get to decompress immediately. You take one call, then another, then another, but sometimes a call lingers. This one lingered. I kept thinking about her whispering into the phone, about how close she came to dismissing that feeling, about how easy it would have been for her to tell herself she was being silly, that it was nothing, that she didn't want to bother anyone. If she hadn't called, he would still have been there. And that thought is terrifying, because this wasn't a smash and grab. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was someone choosing to remain hidden inside an occupied home. Someone willing to stay silent, motionless, invisible. People like that don't need chaos. They thrive on stillness. I've taken thousands of calls. I've heard panic, grief, anger, confusion, fear. I've heard people on the worst day of their lives. But there's something uniquely unsettling about calls where danger is quiet, where nothing is happening yet, but something very much could. That woman trusted her instincts. She didn't have proof. She didn't have evidence. She just had a feeling that something was wrong, and she was right. I wish more people understood how often that happens. How often the false alarm turns out to be the thing that saves someone. How often embarrassment is the only cost of being cautious. If there's one thing this job has taught me, it's that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind a cabinet door, holding its breath, waiting for you to decide you're overreacting. That call still sends chills down my spine. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. I worked with a guy who had a criminal record, but that wasn't unusual for that job. A lot of people there had rough pasts, and I've never been the type to judge someone just because of that. You show up, you do your work, you mind your business. That was the culture. He lived close to me, just a few blocks away, so I'd give him rides home sometimes. I'd drop him off, he'd get out, and I'd walk the rest of the way to his place. We worked late hours, usually midnight shifts, and sometimes we'd get off around bar close, like 2 or 3 in the morning. That meant the streets were still active. Dealers, people hanging out in front of apartment buildings, groups just lingering. It was sketchy looking, sure, but it was normal for the area. No one ever bothered me. I'm a white woman, and for whatever reason, that seemed to make me invisible to most of it. One night, after work, I pulled up to my building and dropped him off like usual. As he got out of the car, there were a couple of guys standing outside my building, the kind people jokingly call doormen, even though they're definitely not employed by the building. They were just hanging out, watching people come and go. Their vibe toward me had always been neutral at best. Not hostile, not friendly, just watching. As he stepped away from my car, he nodded at them and said something like, "She's cool." That was it, just that. But I noticed the shift immediately. Their body language changed. Their faces softened. One of them smiled, another nodded at me. The energy went from indifferent to friendly, almost protective. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable enough that it stuck with me. I remember thinking, that's interesting, and then brushing it off. At the time, I didn't assign any deeper meaning to it. Later that night, during my break at work, I was scrolling through Facebook. That's when I saw a post about a shooting. Someone had been shot to death just a few blocks from where I lived. Close enough that it made my stomach tighten a little. The details were vague, but the location was uncomfortably familiar. Then I realized something else. That coworker wasn't at work that night. On its own, that didn't mean much. People called out all the time. People disappeared for a shift or two and came back like nothing happened. But I had a sudden, heavy gut feeling that I couldn't explain. It wasn't logical. It wasn't based on evidence. It was just this deep sense of certainty that hit me out of nowhere. I remember thinking it was him. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even fully want to admit it to myself. It felt wrong to jump to that conclusion. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. But the feeling didn't go away. About a month later, the news broke that they had arrested someone for the shooting. It was my coworker. Seeing his name and face connected to it made my stomach drop all over again, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. That's the part that scared me the most. Some part of me had already known. What made it even stranger was what happened before the arrest. He came into work one night after the shooting, but before he was caught. He didn't act nervous. He didn't seem off. He didn't look like someone carrying a massive secret. He worked his shift like normal, talked like normal, laughed like normal. Then he mentioned he'd gotten a new job and put in his notice. That wasn't unusual at all in that line of work. People quit constantly. Jobs were temporary. No one made a big deal out of it. After that shift, he called the general manager and quit outright. The GM didn't push back. That also wasn't strange. Management was used to people disappearing overnight. At the time, it barely registered. Looking back, it feels chilling. He was just gone. Then the arrest came, and suddenly all those small moments replayed in my head. The ride home, the way he spoke to the guys outside my building, the immediate shift in how they treated me, the shooting a few blocks away, his absence, that gut feeling I couldn't shake. I think about how casually I interacted with him, how I drove him home late at night without a second thought, how normal everything felt at the time, how easy it is to coexist with someone capable of something horrific and never know it. What sticks with me most isn't fear for myself exactly. It's the realization of how thin the line is between ordinary life and something much darker. How people can move through the world, work jobs, joke with co-workers, accept rides home, and still be living a completely different reality under the surface. And how sometimes your instincts pick up on something long before your brain has proof. That night, when he said she's cool and the whole dynamic around me shifted, I didn't understand what it meant. Now I think about it differently. Not as protection, exactly, but as recognition. Like I had been marked as off-limits by association, without even knowing it. That realization still gives me chills, because it means I was closer to something dangerous than I ever realized. And the only reason I walked away untouched is because I happened to be standing on the right side of someone else's reputation. And that's not a comforting thought at all. To this day, I still think about Miss Pamela. I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan. And when I was a kid, she was one of our neighbors. Back then, adults felt larger than life, but some of them stood out in a different way. Miss Pamela was one of those people. Her mom was awesome. The kind of adult who didn't talk down to kids or treat them like background noise. She was cool as hell, genuinely kind, and she drove a pretty sweet car that always caught my attention. There was an energy about their house that felt alive, familiar, safe. Miss Pamela herself had a presence. Even as a kid, I could tell she wasn't like everyone else. She didn't feel distant or unapproachable. She felt real. She talked to you like you mattered. To me, she was just one of the cool adults in the neighborhood, someone you noticed in a good way. Then one day, she was gone. At the time, I didn't understand what was really happening. I just knew that people were talking, that something felt wrong, that there was an absence where a person used to be. What I didn't know then, what I only learned later, was that Miss Pamela drank. And because of that, when she disappeared, the people who were supposed to help didn't take it seriously. Her daughter did, though. Her daughter kept telling the police that something was wrong. She was adamant. She knew her mom. She knew this wasn't normal. She knew this wasn't just another bender or a case of someone disappearing for a while. But the police didn't listen. They brushed it off. They categorized Miss Pamela as just another drunk who wandered off. Another problem adult who didn't deserve urgency. That dismissal still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. What actually happened was horrifying. Someone liked Miss Pamela's car. That was it. That was the motive. He stole it. And when he did, he put her in the trunk. She was alive. He drove around with her in there for days. Days. And what makes it even worse is that he wasn't alone in knowing. His girlfriend knew she was in the trunk. I suspect more people knew too. It's hard to believe something like that could happen without others being aware, without someone hearing something, noticing something, choosing to look the other way. Eventually, Miss Pamela died. From what I remember, she ended up drinking antifreeze. Whether that was desperation, coercion, or a last attempt to escape unbearable suffering, I don't know. I don't know the exact details of how she was finally found, only that by the time the truth came out, it was far too late. She had her issues. I know that now. I understand addiction better now than I did as a kid. I understand how messy life can be, how people can struggle and still be good, still be loved, still deserve protection. But to that kid she was just Miss Pamela, a cool neighbor, someone who existed in my world in a positive way. What haunts me is how completely she was failed. She was failed by the system that decided her life mattered less because of her drinking. Failed by the people who dismissed her daughter's fear. Failed by the people who knew what was happening and did nothing. Failed by a world that decided she was disposable. She absolutely adored her grandbabies. That's something that always sticks with me. I hope they knew that. I hope they felt it. I hope they carry that love with them, even if the circumstances of her death are something no one should ever have to carry. I'm around her age now. That realization hit me harder than I expected. When I think about Miss Pamela now, I don't just see her as a neighbor from my childhood. I see her as a woman who was living her life, flawed and human, loving her family, existing in a world that didn't protect her when she needed it most. I think about how easily it could have been different, how if she had been taken seriously right away, she might have been found. How if someone had listened to her daughter, acted sooner, refused to dismiss her as just another drunk, she might still be alive. I think about how many other people this has happened to. How many disappearances were written off because someone had a history, an addiction, a reputation that made them easy to ignore. How many families screamed that something was wrong and were met with indifference. Miss Pamela didn't deserve what happened to her. She didn't deserve to be reduced to a stereotype. She didn't deserve to be trapped, suffering, unseen. She didn't deserve to die the way she did. And she certainly didn't deserve to be forgotten. I think of her often, not in a constant, consuming way, but in quiet moments. When I think about fairness, when I think about how the system treats people, it deems unworthy. When I think about how fragile safety really is, To the world, she might have been a statistic or a brief news story. To me, she was Miss Pamela. A cool neighbor, a woman who loved her grandkids, a person who should have been protected and wasn't, and that will never sit right with me. When people talk about crimes that completely change the atmosphere of a place, this is always the one that comes to mind for me. I was a teenager in St. Catharines when it happened, and it's hard to explain just how deeply it shook everything. It wasn't just another crime story on the news. It felt like something rotten had been uncovered right in the middle of ordinary life. Something that proved how wrong you could be about the people living next door. The case is often referred to as the Ken and Barbie killers because of how they looked from the outside. Clean-cut, attractive, young, a married couple who, at a glance, seemed like they had everything going for them. Their names were Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, husband and wife. That contrast between appearance and reality is part of what made the whole thing so disturbing. They didn't kill dozens of people, which is sometimes how these cases get measured, but the number doesn't really matter when you look at what they actually did. They kidnapped, raped, tortured, and murdered young girls, and they filmed it. Not snippets, not accidental recordings. They documented everything, every assault, every moment of suffering. The crimes weren't just violent. They were deliberate, planned, and preserved so they could relive them later. Before he was ever identified as a killer, Bernardo was already terrorizing communities as the Scarborough rapist. For years, women were being attacked in their homes, and no one knew who he was. There was a constant sense of fear, especially for young women. Parents were scared. Teenagers were scared. People locked their doors earlier, walked in groups, checked over their shoulders. When it eventually came out that the Scarborough rapist and the man behind the murders were the same person, it felt like the pieces of a nightmare snapping together. What makes this case especially hard to stomach is Carla Homolka's role in it. For a long time, the narrative pushed was that she was a victim herself, that she was manipulated, controlled, abused by Bernardo, and forced to participate. That story fell apart when the videotapes were discovered. On those tapes, she wasn't a passive bystander. She was active, engaged, smiling, participating, helping. The most horrifying part, the detail that still turns my stomach, is what they did to her own sister. Carla's sister was a preteen, a child, someone who should have been safe in her own home. Carla and Bernardo drugged her using a veterinary anesthetic they had access to. They raped her, and they gave her too much. She died as a result. Her death was initially ruled an accident. The truth didn't come out until much later, after the tapes were found. That betrayal is almost impossible to comprehend. It wasn't just murder. It was a complete annihilation of trust, of family, of any basic human boundary. Carla didn't just allow it to happen. She facilitated it. She handed her sister over. When the legal process unfolded, it became one of the most controversial moments in Canadian justice. Carla struck a plea deal before the full extent of the videotape evidence was known. In exchange for her testimony against Bernardo, she received a significantly reduced sentence. 12 years. People still refer to it as the deal with the devil, and that's not exaggeration. Once the tape surfaced and it became clear how involved she really was, there was no way to undo the deal. The public outrage was enormous. People felt betrayed not just by her, but by the system itself. Bernardo was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Few people argue with that outcome. Carla, on the other hand, served her sentence and was released. She got out. That fact alone still makes people angry decades later. She changed her name. She moved. She tried to rebuild a life. She ended up in Quebec. She had 3 children. Every time news surfaced about her living a relatively normal life, it reopened old wounds, not just for the families of the victims, but for an entire generation of people who remembered what it felt like to be young and scared when this was happening. From what's been reported, her later life has been anything but stable. Her ex-husband reportedly threw her out, and she no longer sees her children. Even that doesn't bring much comfort to people who followed the case, because it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like consequences that still don't match the harm done. Karla Homolka is often described as one of the most manipulative people imaginable, and it's hard to argue with that. She managed to present herself convincingly enough as a victim to secure a deal that spared her a much longer sentence. She shaped the narrative around herself for years, even as evidence existed that told a very different story. For those of us who lived nearby, who were teenagers at the time, this case did something lasting. It shattered the illusion that monsters looked like monsters. Bernardo and Homolka looked like people you might pass in a mall, people you might sit next to in a restaurant, people you wouldn't cross the street to avoid. It also changed how people thought about trust, about relationships, about the idea that evil can be shared, encouraged, and normalized between 2 people who reinforce each other's worst impulses. This wasn't a lone killer hiding in the shadows. It was a partnership, a marriage, a shared project of cruelty. Even now, years later, the case still feels raw, not because of the headlines or the nicknames, but because of the details, the tapes, the sister, the plea deal. The fact that one of them will never leave prison, while the other walks free under a different name, somewhere out there, living a life that her victims never got the chance to live. For a lot of us, it was the moment we realized that the world could be far darker than we had imagined, and that sometimes the systems meant to protect people fail in ways that can never really be fixed. Once you've lived through something like that, even from the outside, it stays with you. It doesn't fade into history. It just becomes part of how you understand it. When I was growing up, our childhood home always felt a little strange, even before anything truly frightening happened. It was a tall house with 3 floors, the kind of place that always made noises, no matter how old it was or how careful you were. At first, those sounds felt normal. Floors settle, pipes shift, houses breathe. That's what adults tell you, and as a kid, you believe them because you want to. But over time, those explanations stopped being enough. Strange things happened all over the house. Dishes would clang together in the kitchen when no one was in there. Not a single dish slipping or falling, but the sound of multiple things moving, like someone was handling them. You'd hear it clearly from the living room or the hallway, and someone would always say, "Did you hear that?" One of us would get up, walk into the kitchen, and find it completely empty. No pets, no open windows, nothing out of place. Sometimes you'd hear footsteps in another room. Slow, deliberate steps, not the creaks of the house settling. The sound of someone walking from one side of a room to the other. When you checked, the room would be empty. Lights off, door closed. No one there. Those moments always ended with an uncomfortable silence, everyone pretending it was nothing, because admitting it was something felt worse. Still, none of that compared to the third floor. The third floor of the house felt different from the rest. It was quieter, but not in a peaceful way. The air felt heavier up there, like it didn't circulate properly. The light was always dimmer, even during the day, and at night it felt completely cut off from the rest of the house. Sound traveled strangely. Sometimes you could hear everything from downstairs. Other times, it felt like the third floor existed in its own separate world. My sister had the only bedroom on the third floor. That alone made it unsettling. She was isolated up there, separated from everyone else by 2 full flights of stairs. When you stood at the bottom and looked up, the staircase seemed to stretch longer than it should. At night, it felt endless. None of us liked going up there unless we absolutely had to. My sister didn't complain much at first. She was older than me, and I think she tried to act brave. But even she admitted later that something about that floor always made her uncomfortable. She never felt alone up there, even when she was. One night, she was cleaning her room. She had the vacuum running, the loud, constant noise filling the space. The kind of sound that makes you feel a little safer because it drowns everything else out. She was focused on what she was doing, moving back and forth across the floor, when she suddenly heard something that didn't belong. At first, she thought it was the vacuum echoing weirdly. Then she realized it wasn't. Over the sound of the vacuum, she heard voices. 2 men. They were talking to each other, not shouting, not whispering, just talking, like 2 adults having a normal conversation. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she could clearly hear that there were 2 distinct voices. Along with that, she heard the sound of boxes falling. Not a single box tipping over, but multiple boxes hitting the floor, like someone had knocked over a stack. Her heart started racing. She told us later that her first thought was that someone had broken into the house and gone up to the 3rd floor. That was terrifying enough. But the house wasn't old enough or big enough to hide 2 grown men without someone noticing. And no one else had gone upstairs. She turned off the vacuum. The sudden silence made everything worse. With the vacuum off, the voices were gone. So were the sounds of the boxes. The 3rd floor was completely quiet. She stood there for a few seconds, frozen, listening as hard as she could. No footsteps, no movement, no voices, nothing. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your ears. She walked to the window and looked outside, expecting to see something. Someone. Anything that would explain what she had just heard. There was nobody. No men, no movement. No reason for those sounds to exist. That was when panic set in. She didn't stay to investigate. She didn't try to be brave. She grabbed what she could and ran. She ran down the stairs as fast as she could, skipping steps, nearly falling. She didn't stop until she reached the lower floor where the rest of us were. She was shaking. When she told us what happened, no one laughed. No one told her she imagined it. We could see how scared she was. The fear wasn't dramatic. It was deep and real, the kind that doesn't fade quickly. After that, she avoided being alone on the 3rd floor whenever possible. Time passed, and nothing that intense happened again for a while, but the feeling never left. The house still made noises, still felt watched, still had moments that made your stomach drop for no clear reason. Then it happened to my brother. My brother had spent time in the military. He had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to assess threats, to not panic easily. If anyone in our family was going to shrug something off as nothing, it would have been him. He went up to the 3rd floor alone one day. I don't remember exactly why. Maybe he was grabbing something from storage. Maybe he was helping move things around. It didn't seem important at the time. What mattered was how he came back down. He didn't walk. He ran. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs was loud and fast, like he was trying to get away from something. He burst into the lower level with a look on his face that none of us had seen before. His eyes were wide. His jaw was tight. He looked genuinely shaken. He didn't joke about it. He didn't downplay it. He just said he heard something up there and that he wasn't going back. Later, when he explained, his story was uncomfortably similar to my sister's. He heard voices, more than one. It sounded like people talking in the distance, not directly in the room, but close enough that he could tell it wasn't coming from outside. He couldn't make out the words, but he could tell it was a conversation. The moment he stopped and listened, the sound vanished. That was enough. For someone with his background to react that way told us everything we needed to know. After that, the third floor became something we avoided completely. No one stayed up there alone. If someone had to go up, they brought someone else with them. Even during the day, it felt wrong. At night, it was unbearable. Looking back now, the most disturbing part isn't any single event. It's the consistency. Different people, different times, similar experiences, voices, movement. The feeling of not being alone, the sudden silence when attention was given to it. None of us saw anything. That almost makes it worse. There were no shadows to blame. No tricks of the light. Just sound and presence and fear. The house never gave us answers. We eventually moved out and the strange activity stopped. Not immediately, but gradually. The new house felt lighter, quieter in a normal way. The kind of quiet that doesn't make your skin crawl. Years later, when we talk about that house, the third floor always comes up. We still get uncomfortable when we remember it. We still lower our voices, even though we're not there anymore. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know if it was something paranormal or something we'll never be able to explain. What I do know is that it affected all of us, and it affected us in the same way. Fear doesn't lie like that. And whatever was on that third floor made sure we knew we weren't alone. I don't remember every detail perfectly, but the story has stayed with me in a way that never really faded. I read about it years ago, and even now, whenever I think about driving, it comes back to the surface. It wasn't a ghost story or something mysterious in the usual sense. It was real, documented, recorded, and that's what makes it so much worse. It was a family in a car. A Toyota, I think. They were driving down the highway like millions of people do every single day. Nothing special about it. No bad weather, no reckless driving, no crime involved. Just people going somewhere, trusting that the machine they were sitting inside would do what it was designed to do. At some point, something went wrong. The gas pedal got stuck. That sentence sounds small when you read it. Almost harmless. But when you really think about it, it's terrifying. A gas pedal stuck in the down position doesn't just mean the car keeps moving. It means the car accelerates. It keeps accelerating. And the driver loses the most basic form of control. They tried to stop. They pressed the brakes. But the car didn't slow the way it should have. Maybe the brakes overheated. Maybe the engine overpowered them. Maybe panic made it harder to think clearly. It's easy from the outside to say what someone should do in that situation. Put the car in neutral. Turn off the engine. But when you're actually in it, when your heart is racing and the car is roaring louder and louder, logic doesn't always come easily. The speed kept climbing. They were going over 100 miles per hour. On a public road. Inside the car, the situation was turning into a nightmare, the engine screaming. The road rushing toward them too fast to process, every second making things worse instead of better. At some point, they realized they weren't going to be able to handle it on their own. They called 911. That call is what makes the story almost unbearable to think about, because we don't just know what happened. We can hear it. The person on the phone tried to help. They asked questions. They tried to understand what was happening. They tried to give instructions. But the car just kept going faster. The family tried to follow the advice, but nothing worked. The engine didn't respond. The car didn't slow down. You can hear the fear in their voices. This wasn't screaming right away. At first, it was tense, urgent talking. Voices overlapping, people trying to stay calm while clearly failing. As the speed increased, the panic became impossible to hide. The sound of wind, the sound of the engine, the sound of people realizing they were running out of options. At some point, they managed to get off the highway. That alone probably felt like a small victory, like maybe they still had a chance. Highways are dangerous at extreme speeds, but at least intersections are familiar. At least there's a chance to steer somewhere safer. At least there are roads people use every day. But intersections are also where other people are. As they approached the intersection, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. They weren't just at risk themselves anymore. Anyone crossing that road could be in danger. Cars that had nothing to do with this malfunction, with this failure, were suddenly in the path of something unstoppable. That's when the shouting turned into something else. On the call, they could be heard yelling and screaming. Pray. That word is burned into my mind. Not help, not what do we do, not we're sorry. Pray. That's not something people say unless they know there's nothing left. That's what you say when you've reached the end of control, when you understand that no skill, no reaction, no decision is going to change what's about to happen. The call goes dead shortly after. The car crashed into another vehicle at the intersection. They were killed instantly. The people in the other car were killed too. Lives that had nothing to do with that Toyota. People who were just driving, just crossing an intersection, just living their normal day. All of it ended because a machine failed in the worst possible way, and there was no time to escape it. When I first read about it, I felt sick. Not just sad or shocked, but deeply unsettled. This wasn't someone speeding on purpose. This wasn't drunk driving or reckless behavior. This was a situation where everyone involved did what they were supposed to do. They bought a car from a trusted manufacturer. They drove it responsibly. They called for help when something went wrong. And it still ended like that. The 911 recording makes it impossible to distance yourself from the event. It turns statistics into people. You hear real voices, real fear, real desperation. You hear the exact moment when hope disappears. That's something your brain doesn't forget easily, even if you only hear about it secondhand. Car accidents have always bothered me, but stories like this are on another level. They hit something fundamental. We drive every day assuming a certain level of safety. We trust that the pedals will respond, that the brakes will work, that if something goes wrong, we'll have at least a few options to save ourselves. But machines aren't perfect. They're built by humans, designed by humans, tested by humans, and humans make mistakes. Parts fail, systems interact in ways no one fully predicted. A tiny defect can turn into a chain reaction that no one inside the car can stop once it starts. That idea terrifies me. I have to drive every day. I don't have a choice. It's how I get to work, how I run errands, how I exist in the world. And every time I sit behind the wheel, there's a part of my mind that remembers that story. A quiet voice that says, you're trusting a machine with your life right now. Most of the time, nothing happens. Millions of trips end safely every single day. But that doesn't erase the reality. that sometimes, for reasons completely outside the driver's control, things go catastrophically wrong. What makes this particular story worse is the sense of helplessness. There was time, but not enough. There was awareness, but no solution. There was communication, but no fix. They weren't unconscious. They weren't unaware. They were fully present for every second of it, trapped inside a speeding vehicle, knowing exactly how bad it was getting. That's a level of fear I can't fully imagine, and I don't want to. I think about the moment when someone in that car realized the brakes weren't working. The exact second when hope turned into dread. I think about the driver gripping the steering wheel, trying everything they could think of. I think about the passengers realizing they had no control at all, that they were just along for the ride. I think about the people in the other car who never heard the 911 call, never saw it coming, never had time to react. It makes driving feel fragile. People talk about trusting technology more and more, self-driving cars, automated systems, more computers, more sensors, more software. And while those things can reduce certain types of human error, they also introduce new kinds of failure. Different points where something can go wrong in a way no one expects. This story sits right at that intersection between trust and fear. You have to trust your car to function, because if you don't, you can't live a normal life. But once you understand how badly things can fail, that trust is never blind again. Even now, I sometimes catch myself paying extra attention to the way my car feels, the response of the pedals, the sound of the engine, the way the brakes react. Any hesitation, any delay, any unfamiliar sensation immediately sets off alarm bells in my head. I know that kind of hyper-awareness isn't always healthy, but it's hard to shake once you've internalized stories like this. What haunts me most isn't just that they died. It's how they died, fully aware, fully conscious, doing everything right, asking for help, being told what to do, and still being carried straight into an ending they couldn't avoid. The word pray says everything about that moment. It says they had reached the point where science, technology, and human intervention had all failed them. All that was left was hope in something beyond control. And that's why car accidents are the worst to me. Not because they're always violent or dramatic, but because they're so ordinary. They happen in places we travel every day, on roads we know, in vehicles we rely on. They don't require bad intentions or reckless choices. Sometimes all it takes is a malfunction at the wrong moment. Every time I get into a car, I think about how many things have to go right for me to get where I'm going safely. How many systems have to work perfectly every time. How much of that is completely outside my control. I still drive. I have to. But that story lives in the back of my mind as a reminder of how quickly normal life can turn into something final, and how sometimes the scariest horror stories aren't supernatural at all. They're mechanical, and they're real. I was 13 years old, living in Queens, New York, in a quiet neighborhood that sat close to the water. It was the kind of place where nothing ever really happened, where nights felt calm and familiar, and where kids like me felt safe being outside longer than we probably should have. That summer, my bike was everything to me. I rode it every chance I got, especially my BMX, practicing small tricks in front of my house until my legs burned and my hands were sore from gripping the handlebars too tightly. That night started like any other. I remember the air being warm but not uncomfortable. The kind of late summer night where the city noise fades, just enough for you to hear the water in the distance. The streetlights cast long yellow shadows across the pavement, and most of the houses around me were already dark. It was getting late. close to 11 at night, and I knew I should head inside soon. My parents didn't like me being out that late, even though I was just right outside. I told myself I would do one last thing before calling it a night. Near my neighborhood, there was a waterfront trail that ran alongside the water. It wasn't anything special, just a narrow path with a few trees scattered along it, but I liked riding there because it felt peaceful and private. At night, it was usually empty. No cars, no people, just the sound of my tires rolling over the ground and the quiet movement of the water nearby. I pedaled toward the trail, feeling relaxed and completely unaware that anything strange was about to happen. My mind was focused on nothing important. School, friends, video games. The usual thoughts of a 13-year-old kid. I remember feeling calm, even a little happy, enjoying the freedom of being alone with my bike in the quiet night. I rode the length of the trail without any issues. Nothing felt off at first. When I reached the end and started slowing down, that was when I noticed something ahead of me. Near one of the trees, standing just off the path, was a woman dressed in a white gown. At first, I didn't think much of it. Queens is full of strange sights, and my brain tried to make sense of it quickly. Maybe she was part of a photo shoot. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe she was just standing there, and the lighting made her look odd. But something about the way she stood made me uneasy. She wasn't moving at all, not shifting her weight, not adjusting her posture, just standing there, perfectly still. I slowed my bike to a stop, staring at her from a distance. The gown was long and white, hanging straight down, almost blending into the darkness around her, except where the moonlight touched it. Her hair appeared dark, falling around where her face should have been. That was when I realized something was wrong. I couldn't see her face. At first, I told myself I was too far away. The lighting wasn't great, and maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I leaned forward slightly on my bike, squinting, trying to make out her features, eyes, a nose, a mouth, anything. But there was nothing there, just smoothness, like her face had been erased. My heart started to beat faster, but I still didn't panic. Kids rationalize things quickly, especially when fear doesn't make sense yet. I thought maybe it was a mannequin. Maybe someone had dumped it there for some weird reason. Or maybe she was wearing a mask that blended into the darkness. To test it, I shouted out, "Hey!" My voice echoed slightly in the quiet night. The sound felt louder than it should have been. The woman didn't react. She didn't turn her head. She didn't move. She didn't acknowledge me at all. That was when the fear really started to settle in. A deep, uncomfortable feeling crept into my chest. The kind that tells you something isn't right even when you can't explain why. I should have turned around right then. I know that now. But curiosity, mixed with disbelief, pushed me forward. I slowly pedaled closer. With every rotation of the wheels, my body felt tighter. 10 feet. That's all the closer I got. About 10 feet away from her. Close enough that there was no denying what I was seeing. She had no face. There were no shadows hiding features. No mask lines. No movement that suggested a trick. Just a blank, smooth surface where a face should have been. I remember feeling dizzy, like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. My hands tightened on the handlebars, and I stopped breathing for a moment without realizing it. Then her head turned toward me. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow and deliberate, as if she had finally noticed me and decided to acknowledge my presence. That single movement shattered whatever calm I had left. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't think. I took off. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were going to explode. And my heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if she was following me or if she had moved at all. I just wanted to get home. When I reached my house, I practically threw my bike down and ran inside, slamming the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, shaking, listening for any sound outside. Nothing followed me. The house was quiet, normal, safe. I didn't tell anyone what I saw, not my parents, not my friends, not even myself, really. I pushed it down, convinced myself that I had imagined it, that fear and darkness had combined to create something that wasn't real. Over time, the memory faded into something uncomfortable, but distant. Years passed, and I grew up. Life moved on. And 10 years later, I got a call from a childhood friend. We were talking about old memories, the neighborhood, how things used to be. Somehow, the waterfront trail came up in the conversation. There was a pause on the line before he said something that made my stomach drop. He asked me if I had ever seen anything strange there. I didn't answer right away. I asked him what he meant. His voice changed when he spoke again, lower and more serious. He told me that one night, not long before that call, he had been near the trail and saw a woman standing by a tree wearing a white gown. My entire body went cold. He told me she had no face. I didn't interrupt him. I let him talk, let him explain how he froze in place, how fear washed over him, how he ran as soon as she turned her head toward him. Every detail matched my experience from 10 years earlier. Same spot, same gown, same impossible absence of a face. That was the first time I ever told anyone about what I saw. 1 year after that conversation, something even darker happened. A mutual friend of ours, someone we had grown up with, someone who knew that neighborhood as well as we did, took his own life. He shot himself in the head just a few feet from the exact spot where both of us had seen the faceless woman. There was no note that explained why, no warning signs that made sense afterward. Just shock, grief, and a question that none of us could answer. I still think about that night sometimes, about the girl I was at 13, riding her bike without a care in the world, and how one moment changed something inside me forever. I don't know what that woman was. I don't know if she was connected to what happened years later. I don't know if some places hold on to things that we don't understand. All I know is that whatever stood by that tree didn't feel like a prank, or a trick, or something human. And even now, years later, I avoid that waterfront trail when the sun goes down. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.